I have all these excuses for me to not do it, but there was one voice that I remember specifically that said, God literally said, why don't you try me? Why don't you obey me and see what I can do with your obedience? And I agreed to be Kids Ministry Director, volunteer, and still to this day.
Hi, good evening everybody. We're here for another episode of Brunch with Nick. And today we have Roevee Tisoy. He's the Kids Ministry Director at La Palma Christian Center. How are you doing?
Hello, Ate Mick. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to have this talk with you.
Yeah, me too. Oh my gosh. And I'm so glad you're here. So the very first time I met Roevee Tisoy was because of Miss Philippines USA. He was a candidate and he actually got the title of Mr. Congeniality.
Yeah, I am very proud of that title because it's one of those awards in which it's a character award, and it was voted by peers. And I'm really, really grateful to have, number one, have the opportunity to compete and to also build relationships, not just with the candidates, but to the people who are involved in the pageant, such as you, Ate. So really, really grateful for the overall experience and opportunity.
Yes, and of course we're blessed that he is with us today. And of course, shout out to Lou Razon and everyone involved with Miss Philippines USA and Mr. Philippines USA.
Awesome,
right?
Yeah, thank you.
This is how we met.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So
it was
awesome.
A way for us to be here now.
Yeah, you're so deserving of Mr. Congeniality because you're super friendly. I mean, and that explains why you're in the youth ministry. You know, because it takes a lot of skill to deal with kids, with young people.
Correct.
And so how did you end up being in the church ministry? How did you end up being part of the youth ministry?
Okay.
That's a really hard thing to do.
I know. Well, that's actually a really great question, Ate. So, growing up, I actually immigrated from the Philippines, and I came here when I was 12, around 2003. And so, I was already a Christian when I came, but obviously at such a young age, it's really difficult for you to get a foothold on what God's will for your life is. And so, I was always a rebellious child growing up, and in 2007, I entered high school. And in high school, you are required at that time for my year, we were required to do a community service. And so
was that over here?
Here in the States,
okay.
Yeah. So specifically in Rowland Heights, which I currently reside at. And so at that time, I had no idea on what I'm going to do with regards to having to do a community service. But we were already going to the same church since 2003, which is La Palma Christian Center. And there was a ministry that was in need of a volunteer. And my parents enrolled me into it without me knowing, which is kids ministry. And at that time, I never wanted to be a part of any ministry because I thought church was boring. As a kid growing up, I'd fall asleep. I'd rather do something else. However, because of that requirement, I said, you know what, I'm going to go. And lo and behold, since 2007, I never left kids ministry. And so from 2007, kids changed me from the way I perceive them. At first you would say, well, it takes a lot of patience. It does. And for me, growing up, I saw my mom having the patience at home when I talk bad about her, when I'm arguing about her. And so I said, you know what? I want to do the reverse. I want to be like my mom, and I want to be able to do ministry as effective as I could be, while also fulfilling the requirement for school. And so I just grew up there at the church and in ministry. And over time, I discovered that the kids ministry director position at my specific church has a lot of turnover. So we would hire someone, they would leave in about a year or so or two. And in this particular time, around 2015, there was a lady that left the church, and she was the kids ministry director at the time, and she recommended that I take over in the meantime as the kids ministry director. And so when she recommended me, the head pastor consulted with me, and I wrestled with it at the minute. I said, no, I don't want to be a kids ministry director. I already have a full-time job. I had a girlfriend at the time. Life is too busy, and I'm not going to do it. And so, but there was no one else that she trusted other than me. And so I prayed about it, and I said, God, is this the time for me to take the next level from just being a volunteer to now being a head of volunteers, being a mentor? The people that I'm mentoring are older than me. There were questions like, are they going to listen to me? Are they going to respect me? Who am I? I have no experience. I have all these excuses for me to not do it. But there was one voice that I remember specifically at the end that said, God literally said, why don't you try me? Why don't you obey me and see what I can do with your obedience? And I agreed to be kids ministry director, volunteer, and still to this day it's volunteer. And I just remember God opening doors as far as my career blossoming after the obedience. And also along the way, I was able to develop mentorship skills or leadership abilities that I never knew that I would have developed if I never took it. And so now, fast forward, 2024, I enjoy the mentorship aspect while also enjoying the teaching aspect of the kids, because I get to minister to the young adults that will soon, one day they're going to have their own ministries, and they're going to be able to do some organization, be able to communicate effectively, be able to teach the kids on their own, and have their own team as well. So from there on out, since 2007 until now, I've been in kids ministry, and I love doing it.
But you took it wholeheartedly, and you've come to love it, right? Do you feel like you're missing something when you're not doing it, when you're not there with the kids?
For me, that's another good question. Every time I take a vacation and I'm not there, I feel like I'm missing out on something. And I always want to be involved, but I also want my leaders to know that I trust them. So there's a delicate balance there. But one thing for sure that reassures me that kids ministry is what I love doing is there was a point in time, actually just this past June, where we always have this thing called VBS, which is Vacation Bible School, in which during the weekday we would have kids church, and this year it was supermarket. And then there's one kid there that has been going to my church for quite some time. Here and there, grandma and grandpa would bring him. He's in 4th grade. And when the first time he came, he told us, hey, I don't feel loved at home. And lo and behold, he came from a broken family in which mom and dad were separated, and every time he was with mom or dad, either would blame him for their difficult circumstance. in which as a kid, you would never want to be in that position. And so from that time, he kept blaming himself to the point where he just felt so out of sync from the world. And I remember during one of the praise and worship section of our program at church, he went to one of the leaders and said, I don't deserve the love that I feel right now. I don't deserve the love that you give me. And it's like, it was such a heartbreaking moment. And so when the leader told me that instance, I said, okay, we had a meeting, and I said, okay, it's our job to make sure that not only him, but all the kids feel love at all times. This is why we do ministry. Because of at least just one, to feel that love of Jesus, and to feel love because they don't come from a loving home. And so from there on out, we were very intentional with him, more so than the others as well. But, everyone comes from a different background, and he just happened to need more of it. And so fast forward to June, he came to us, he came to me, and he said, Pastor Roevee, that's my name to him, Pastor Roevee, thank you, because this is the church that makes him feel loved. And it's something that he's never felt before. And so he gave us a card, and I showed it to all our leaders and said, guys, girls, this is why we do kids ministry. Even if it's just him amongst all the 60 kids that we serve, and if it's just him, that is why we do it. And that is why God has put us here. And it touches us. And to me, that's a reminder of why I do kids ministry. Yes, there are frustrations at times, and it's never going to be easy. Ministry is never easy. You're volunteering your time, you're volunteering your patience, but the reward of it, you're saving the kids' lives. You are carving their future. You're building the foundation, a godly foundation.
How would you tell the kids that God loves them, Jesus Christ loves them, that they're not alone, given the circumstances of that one child? He came from a broken family, and he obviously verbalized that he doesn't feel loved.
Right. So the first step is, number one, we pray for them. We make sure that, hey, when you're not around us, God is with you at all times. And we reinforce that. And then we also give them the Bible. But before we give them a Bible, their own copy, we make sure that we teach them how to find God's Word. And also, we give them a sheet of God's promises. It'll say the book of the Bible, where the book, the verse, the chapter, and then the verse. And because we've taught them how to find it themselves, they can read it for themselves. Mm-hmm. They don't have to, yes, Google is there, but we want them to know that God's Word is right there, free of access, free of charge, and they can look it up for themselves. Mm-hmm. They don't need to rely on the internet, so to speak. And if it's down, they have it with them. If they're in the playground, they have it with them, they have a copy. And so it's reinforced. And then when they come in, we make sure that we're very intentional about getting to know their day, getting to know, how they are doing in the mornings, if they had breakfast, small talks, building that relationship. And then the next week you follow up. Hey, how did your recital go? Or, exactly how you would do as an adult in building a relationship. We believe that it's important you also build that relationship with the child, not just when they're there, but also, following up with the grandparents, how they're doing throughout the week. And so, we're just very intentional with each child that we are the representation of God's love in the flesh. And then that they can pray, it's important because God speaks to them and to us in the quiet moments. before sleeping, even as we were walking to school even.
Going back to what you said earlier, when you were contemplating on being a youth minister, being a youth ministry director,
Right.
and you said there was this one voice, how did you hear that voice and how did you see that vision of God for you? Because a lot of times that's my question, like, I'm so busy. So I talked
Yeah.
about this in my daily reflections yesterday.
Right.
I'm so busy, I can't hear or see what God is telling me because I'm always asking, waiting,
Right.
right? How did you even get to that point?
So in the mornings, and even on my drives, I always set aside a time of devotion in which it's quiet. It's literally, I think it's worship music and then me. Just an alone time with God. But you have to set that time. 'Cause when we work, it's work, right? And then during that time as well, I had a long drive, about an hour and a half drive, commute to work. And that's when God reinforces you, even through songs that, because my music player is Pandora, so it's all random songs. I don't build a playlist. It's just the algorithm basically dictates the songs that play. And so when I was praying for 2 weeks straight, music would resonate with me about testing Him, and also scriptures on my devotions. It would just pop out, and there was these. It wasn't really an audible voice. I've never heard God's audible voice per se in my life. Rather, it's through someone speaking to me, like maybe they receive a word, usually at church, and they'll come to me and say, Roevee, God is telling you for you to do this, or whether it's in worship music or the scripture verses, and it's like more of a reaffirmation. Hey, you know what?
How do you remember? How do you remember it? Maybe I've heard, God speak through other people or through other things, like maybe twice or maybe 3 times in the recent weeks, but now I don't remember. So how do you remember? At one point, like 1 or 2 seconds, you remember, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and you're like, oh my God, like I know, like there was something,
I
Now
think
I'm-
for me, what works for me is when I have a life-changing decision that I need to make, you'll remember that because you go, that's the turning point where God directed my path, redirected or directed my path, right? So if it isn't a life-changing one, I usually would make a note on my phone right away. Because there are times, like you said, the little details, sometimes we forget. Because they're not big. They're minuscule, right? Compared to all the things that we do, especially with social media now. There's so many information. So I would I actually text myself quite often on the things that I need to remember what happened on that day. So that's maybe one thing that I would advise you to do. Just text yourself right away, or make a note on your phone. But for life-changing decisions, I guarantee you will never forget.
Growing up, you said there's a lot of conflicts when you were growing up. As normal kids, normal teenagers would, there's a lot of angst inside, deep within you, struggling with emotions and expressing yourself. Did you have any experiences that made you question your belief in God?
Question my belief. Yeah, there's definitely a lot. There's definitely some instances in which I did. Namely, back in 2009, it was the Great Recession. And so growing up, I was used to receiving allowance from my parents. So my mom is a CPA in the Philippines, but she's an accountant here. My dad is a medical biller. And so during that time, both of them lost their job. And as a junior in high school and the eldest, my mom said, I'm gonna need you to help pay the bills. And I said, what? I never expected this. I never thought I would work a day in my life. And I even wrestled with God and I said, God, why is this happening? We're good people, we go to church, we serve in ministry. How come we're having this financial difficulty?
Mm-hmm.
And so it came to a point, I think, that we had 30 days to move out of our home that we were originally purchasing. So we had to short sale the house. And so I was questioning really hard, why is God so cruel? But during this time, I remember my parents, because we would always have a family prayer at night. That was a given. And I expected them to blame God. I expected them to be so negative, but never once. My mom would always say, "Anak, kids, there's a purpose on why we're going through this. We may not see it now, but there's a purpose." And as a rebellious teen and a realist, that is not the answer. That is not the response I wanted. And going back, it's 30 days, and I remember having potential buyers to the house, going in and out of our house. I was showing it to them. And 2 weeks prior to us getting evicted, there was a Vietnamese lady that came in and said, "Hey, young man, I really like the way you showed me the house. I'll tell you what, let me speak to your mom. I'm gonna buy this house and you just rent from me." And I said, "What? You don't have to move." Like, she reiterated, "You don't have to move, I'm gonna buy it." And I said, "No, you're joking." She said, "No, give me your mom's phone number, we're gonna talk." They talked, and that's exactly what happened. We rent from her, right? And we didn't have to move at that time. So that was one instance to where God was showing me, and my mom was right, that there was a purpose. But during that time span, I had to find a job to help pay because my parents were still, out of a job. And so I was literally, my first job was Forever 21. And I never thought I would work. And I discovered how hard it was to make money. And from there, I developed my work ethic. But if it wasn't for that circumstance, there was no way I would be where I am today. And there's no way I would appreciate how hard it is to work long hours, how hard it is to even make payment for rent and bills and stuff like that. And going back to the home again, right? 1 year later, the lady's family is coming from Vietnam. And so she said, "Well, you guys have to move out," right? So here we go again. And so I was a senior already. And I told my friends, "Hey guys, I'm gonna move again. This time it's for real." And mind you, in high school, you don't know what your the parents of your friends do. You just don't know. Mm-hmm. And when I told them that we're getting evicted from the house and we have to go to another school district, one good friend he said, "Hey, I'm gonna ask my parents if they can help you out." And I said, "What? What do you mean?" That was a Monday. I told him on a Monday about the circumstance, and he told me, "Friday, meet me in the back of the school, and I'll show you what I need." And I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So Friday comes, and I meet him at the back of the school, and he goes, "Hey, are you ready to see your new house?" I was like, "What do you mean?" I talked to my parents. They're real estate investors, and I told them about your circumstance, and so they bought a house that is literally 2 streets down from yours. And so you're gonna just rent from us for a cheaper or a better price. I was like, "What? You're joking, right?" He's like, "No, I have the keys." And so we go down. It's literally 2 streets down.
What school did you go to?
Roland High School. I will never forget, it's 2 streets down. It was a bigger house, additional rooms, and long and behold, we're still there to this day. And God provided again, so I was just so thankful. And my mom was literally like, didn't I tell you? You just have to have faith, And so from then on, I don't even question anymore, whether circumstances in my life were hard, I would always revert back to what my mom would say during that time. Because I envision as a parent, that's a whole different aspect. And if she could say, Anak, there's a purpose, then I believe it. And God has always been there with those two and other circumstances as well.
You being a youth minister, how do you explain verses and books from the Bible, who these characters are? How do you explain all of these things that happened thousands and thousands of years ago? When you're preparing to be a pastor, you would read verses a day and books in the Bible, and you need to know what the culture is, what was the cultural practices were during that time when these books in the Bible were written, who wrote them, who was the audience, what's the biblical context, what's the larger story, why were they writing those things, and what the historical context is. One example is Paul the Apostle. He wrote so many long letters.
That's right.
I'm like,
so
what is
many
going
letters.
on? What is going on with Paul the Apostle? Right? How would you explain that to kids? When I first started in this spiritual journey, everything was so abstract. I'm like,
it goes over your head.
What do they mean? How would you explain it to a little kid?
So that's the tricky part, because a lot of the kids that we have, a lot of them don't have the foundation. Albeit there's kids who somehow know, right? But with my, I guess you could say, teaching style, I like to dissect it into series. So we would break it down into, for example, we would dive into one character, the character of Noah. How did Noah come about? What was his origination? What was going on at that time? Why was Noah the chosen one, per se? What were the characteristics that he had for God to choose him to build the ark, right? And so when you introduce characters to the kids, you have to relate it to real life today, in which, when you find out the struggles that Bible characters face is actually the same ones that we face today. So you make it relatable, and you also, because of the social media age and their short attention span, it's not enough that I tell them. There's also a visual aspect, in which I'm thankful there's YouTube, in which you can download the videos. There's cartoons, there's puppets, different types of storytelling depending on the age group. Because for a kindergarten, pre-K, and also kindergarten all the way to 5th grade, there's different graphics that they're going to hold on to. And so I have to be able to, number one, know that fact, and also be able to come up with a series highlighting one's character. And so by the end of the series, they get to have some sense of what that character did, why the character was chosen by God, and why that character is actually them today as well. So for me, that's how we do it, I believe. And I know for an adult, I think it's useful to also attend Bible study groups, or also being able to do your own research, because God gave you wisdom, right? You're not just taking someone's word for it, but you also want to be able to be equipped, and so we equip the kids on how to find the books themselves and to somehow read it. So we guide them through the reading process, And we make sure that, throughout the year, Noah isn't just heard one time. He's going to come again and again at another type of series so that they're familiar with it. And as they grow older, the foundation just builds on it. So that's how
Granted, you're a youth minister and you've read more than others because you have to learn it, you have to study it, and you have to
live by it.
Able to reflect it in order to tell other people about
Correct.
it. What's your favorite story in the Bible?
My favorite story in the Bible? Oh man, there's so many. But my favorite story is when Peter, I believe it's in Matthew 14, when Peter was commanded by God to step out of the boat. If you remember, the apostles are actually in a boat. There was a storm, big storm, and they saw a shadow walking on water. And at first they were terrified. They're like, "Who is that? Is that a ghost?" But it was God. And when they were questioning it, and so Peter said, "Well, if you're Jesus, tell me to walk to you." And Jesus said, "Okay, Peter, walk to me." And guess what Peter does? He walks on water, right? But what happens as soon as he saw the storm and he took his eye off of God, he starts to sink. And God, obviously, he's there. He helps him. And that's when we know that we can trust God. So that's my favorite, because in our lives, we will face so many storms, not just one. And it's going to either break us or make us, right? But the difference between us and unbelievers is that we know that when we go through a storm, it's not just going to be us. God will always be with us. But we have to keep our focus on Him. And there are times we deviate from that and we go, "You know what, God? This storm, maybe you can't take care of this one." Sometimes we forget that, hey, He brought us out of one storm. Why don't you think He can bring you out of this one? So to me, that's my favorite, because a lot of things that go on in a kid's life and an adult life are storms. And so I always hang on to that, because it's like, okay, just focus on God, take a deep breath, because you're not alone. Speaking of the pageant, it was my very first pageant. And to me, it was like, I've never done this before. I was like, God, I'm going to go on stages, on little speaking engagements that I have never been accustomed to. I've always spoken to the kids, but never adults in that manner, and not even with the teenagers as well. And so my prayer was literally, I said, God, I know this is scary, but let them see you through me. And so with that mindset, I was every engagement, and especially with the Alex Theater stage with thousands of people, I was able to overcome that fear and overcome that storm per se. That's just one of it. And so, having Peter there, that story always would resonate, because we can always trust God, no matter how big or how small the storm is. But we have to set our sights on God, right? That we're never alone.
If you were to have your own kids, how would you raise them?
How would I raise my own kid? That's a good question.
So I've attended worship service. Pastors are talking about kids and their own kids and having a relationship with God within their own families. And so, given that you're a youth minister, if you and your family had prayer time,
correct,
and that was a given, how would you raise your own kids?
I believe if God ever gives me that opportunity, number one, I believe it's our responsibility to raise them with a foundation, like a godly foundation. And when they grow up as an adult, when they face difficult times, they're going to be able to remember what they learned in Sunday school. Remember what mom and dad had told them about the Bible. and remember how mom and dad was able to overcome situations, just like how my mom did with prayer. Prayer is such a foundation, an important foundation, because more often than not, in a kid's life, they're going to be alone in some capacity, whether it's at school, whether it's at home. Maybe me and mom, their future mom, would have arguments, right? And maybe they'll feel like, well, I can't talk to mom about this, I can't talk to dad about this. But I want them to know that God is always there. So I'm going to build that foundation that, you know what, no matter what happens, we're going to have that prayer time. I think that was very important. And also, just having a church community to where they can go into Sunday school, or having that church friend group to where it's outside of class, it's outside of school, in which they can talk about the Bible, talk about their experiences in a different lens. Because at the end of the day, I want them to grow, not only knowing God through my perspective or mom's perspective, but I want them to know that, hey, my other friends are also going through the same things at school. Hey, my friends are having similar arguments and similar stresses, and they can talk about how they're going to be able to overcome it, but with a community. So for me, having God there, having prayer, Bible, and also Sunday school, for sure. That's how I would raise them, to the best of my ability. Obviously, there's going to be times like me where I rebel and I wouldn't want to go to church, but I remember my mom would always be constant. No matter if I was rude to her, she'll say, "You have no choice. You're going right now. Get up." You know, and I'm sure I hurt her with my words as well. And so, as a parent, I'm going to be able. I know I'm going to be able to have to take that. And at the end, you know, my hope is that my child will remember that into their adulthood and throughout when they even have kids. So that's what I would do.
Mm-hmm. What makes you hold on to life?
What makes me hold on to life is that I believe that everyone has a purpose. And I think my purpose is to impact or to encourage people that, hey, you're never alone. That, hey, no matter if it's a good time, no matter if it's a sad moment of your life, God is always there. And sometimes we forget that we're not alone. And there are a few instances, sometimes, you know, with friends, sometimes with even family, in which their mental health or even suicidal thoughts creep in. And I feel like my purpose is to just say, hey, to encourage them or to take their lens off of their negative situation, to say, hey, God has greater plans for you. And that it's not just God that's with you, but there's people that love you around your circle. They may not express it, but they're there, you know? And that sometimes a lot of us, even me sometimes, we forget that we're not alone, you know? And we just need that positive reinforcement. And for me, as I grow older, I feel like that's my purpose, to just be there and be an encouragement as much as possible that I could be, whether it's a kid, whether it's an adult or a young adult, in any age, in any capacity. I feel like I have so much love to give, and I think God blessed me with a really, really big heart, you know? It's really hard for me to get frustrated on things, just because I've seen how my parents dealt with me, and how my parents dealt with the negative circumstances I've said before. You know, that they just hang on to the faith, and to be able to take that faith, live it, and then share it, you know, constantly. And it takes a lot of energy, but at the same time, when you're in prayer, when you're in the Word, that's how you get fed. That's how you can get filled, so to speak, right? Because, like in a car, when you're always driving, your gas is gonna go low. And as a believer, you're always getting encouragement when you're always teaching the word. Your spirit or your spiritual energy also goes low. So you have to be able to make sure that you're fed with the word, with prayer, whether it's at church, whether it's at your own personal time, so that you can give more to others. So that's what makes me hang on, because I know that there's one child, there's one adult that doesn't feel love out there. And if it's just that one person that I can impact, if it's just that one person that I can save, in the long run, I've done my share of, I would say, God's plan. And so for me, that's why I hang on to life every day.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, it's such a blessing to have you here.
You're welcome.
On our show, and thank you so much for being with us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Roevee Tisoy.
Thank you for having me. Thank you
so much.
Thank you for watching.
And we'll see you all soon. Good night.
See you. Good night.